My name is Frank Hillmount, and on my 67th birthday, my own son handed me a bottle of wine that was meant to kill me. I didn't drink it. I gave it to his father-in-law instead. And hours later, the man collapsed, poisoned, rushed to the hospital fighting for his life. In that moment, I realized the gift hadn't been love. It had been a weapon. My son had looked me in the eye, smiled, and tried to erase me from existence. What followed was betrayal deeper than I ever imagined, and a revenge he never saw coming. Tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe and tap the like button so more people hear stories like this one. The laughter around the long mahogany table felt like broken glass against my ears. I sat at the far end, my chair placed a good 2 seats away from the heart of the conversation, as if I were some distant relative instead of the man who had raised the very boy sitting at the head. My son, Michael, spoke loudly with his father-in-law, Robert Carson, and their friends. Every so often, their eyes flicked my way, followed by a smirk or a chuckle muffled into a napkin. "Frank probably wouldn't understand," Michael said, his voice smooth with that practiced condescension. "He's old school." The table erupted in knowing laughter, glasses of wine clinking together. I forced my jaw to unclench, running my thumb over the edge of the napkin on my lap. Old school. That's what he called me now. As if the man who broke his back for decades to pay for his education, who put food on the table with overtime shifts and sleepless nights, had suddenly become some artifact, something to be tolerated, then shelved away. Robert Carson leaned in, his cigar-stained voice booming. "Come now, Michael. Don't be too harsh. Your father's still got his uses. He makes for good company at birthdays, doesn't he?" He raised his glass, the deep red wine inside catching the chandelier's glow like liquid fire. His friends laughed again, and my son smiled that small, satisfied smile that twisted something in my chest. I wanted to stand, to slam my hand on the table and remind them whose shoulders Michael once stood on, who had been his teacher, his provider, his protector. But my body stayed still, bound by a strange paralysis of disbelief. How had it come to this? How had I become the punchline at my own table, in my own family's eyes? It was then that Robert Carson's face flushed a violent shade of crimson. He coughed mid-laugh, his hand clutching at his throat. The wine glass slipped from his grip, shattering on the floor as he lurched forward. For one suspended moment, the room froze. Then panic erupted. His wife screamed, Michael jumped to his feet, and guests swarmed to help as Robert crumpled, gasping for breath. The ambulance arrived minutes later, but in that time I sat motionless, my eyes fixed on the half-empty bottle at the center of the table. The very bottle Michael had given me just hours earlier for my birthday. An expensive, limited-edition wine, wrapped so neatly it looked like it belonged in a museum. I had accepted it with polite gratitude, then passed it along to Robert when he admired it. "I don't drink anymore," I'd said, sliding it across the table with a small smile. "But you enjoy it." And now, here we were. The paramedics wheeled Robert out, his body convulsing, his wife sobbing in disbelief. Michael's face was pale, his eyes darting nervously to the bottle. Not to me. Never to me. I didn't need a doctor to tell me what I already suspected in the pit of my stomach. That bottle hadn't been meant for Robert Carson. It had been meant for me. As the sirens faded into the distance, I finally pushed my chair back, the scrape of wood against the marble floor cutting through the whispers. My heart was heavy, my hands trembling slightly on the edge of the table. Betrayal doesn't always come like a knife to the chest. Sometimes it comes wrapped in gold foil and ribbon, delivered with a smile by your own flesh and blood. And in that moment, surrounded by people who saw me as nothing more than a relic, I realized something with a clarity that burned. My son had tried to erase me. The question wasn't why. The question was, how long had he been planning it? That was the night everything changed. But if you want to understand how I ended up there, watching my son's father-in-law being carted off to the hospital from a poisoned gift meant for me, you have to go back. Back to the beginning. Back to when I still believed blood was thicker than water, and love was enough to hold a family together. Because none of this, the poison, the humiliation, the betrayal, happened overnight. It was planted years ago, like a seed, slowly, quietly. It grew in the dark, until it strangled everything I thought was unshakable. I was 24 the day I first held Michael in my arms, and I thought there would never be a greater gift in my life. His tiny hand curled around my finger, his cry soft and helpless, and I swore then that I would protect him with everything I had. I didn't have much in the way of riches back then, just a steady job at the auto plant, a modest house on the south side of Indianapolis, and a heart bursting with determination. I worked shifts that broke my body. My hands were blistered, my back ached, and there were nights I came home so exhausted I could barely stand. But every time I saw Michael sleeping in his crib, or later sitting at the kitchen table with his homework, I felt it was worth it. I wanted him to have what I never did: choices, opportunity, the kind of life where you didn't have to check your bank balance before ordering a meal out. I put away money for his college fund, even when it meant skipping meals myself. I gave up vacations, new clothes, even the idea of retirement comfort, all so my boy could walk into a future without limits. And for a long time, it felt like he understood. When he graduated high school, he hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs might crack. "I'll make you proud, Dad," he whispered. And I believed him. But life has a cruel way of twisting promises. It started small. After Michael graduated from Indiana University, he got a job at a financial firm downtown. Suddenly, his clothes changed. Sleek suits, shiny cufflinks. He spoke differently, too, slipping into phrases I didn't understand, filling our conversations with terms like capital structures and asset portfolios. I nodded along, proud, but feeling the gap between us widen with each passing year. Then came Cassandra. She was beautiful, polished, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. The daughter of Robert Carson, a man who had made his fortune in real estate development and carried himself as if Indianapolis belonged to him personally. I'll never forget the first dinner at their home. I arrived in my best jacket, a little worn but clean, holding a bottle of mid-range whiskey I'd saved up for. Robert took it from me with a thin smile. "Ah, thank you, Frank," he said, his voice oozing politeness. Though, between us, our collection usually leans a bit more premium, but it's the thought that counts. The table laughed softly, as though I had just told a harmless joke at my own expense. Michael said nothing. That was the first red flag, but not the last. Over the years, Robert Carson found subtle ways to remind me of my place. At family gatherings, he'd say things like, "Michael is thriving now, thanks to the circles he's moving in," as if my years of sacrifice were just a warm-up act for Robert's real influence. Cassandra played her part too, smiling sweetly in front of me, but steering Michael further and further into her family's orbit. I became the guest at my own son's milestones. Birthdays, holidays, business celebrations. I was always invited, always seated at the edge of the room, always made to feel like an observer, not a father. The Carsons had wealth, yes, but more than that, they had a way of twisting reality until you believed their version of events. And Michael, my Michael, started to believe it too. He stopped coming to our old Sunday breakfasts at the diner. He stopped calling to ask for advice on little things, fixing a faucet, changing his car battery. I would offer, and he would smile, saying, "It's fine, Dad. Robert's guy takes care of it." Robert's guy. I became obsolete. One night, I visited their home with a small gift, a framed photo of Michael as a boy, missing his 2 front teeth, smiling proudly with the fishing rod we'd used that summer. Cassandra took it from me, her lips tightening. "That's sweet, though our decor is very modern. Maybe Michael can keep this in his office instead. The picture never reappeared. Humiliations piled up like bricks. At a Christmas party, Robert made a toast. "To family," he said, lifting his glass, "to fathers who raise strong sons, and to fathers who prepare them for the real world." His eyes flicked toward me with a glint, and the table chuckled. Michael clinked his glass against Robert's, not mine. I told myself it was just the difference in class, in background. I told myself Michael still loved me, deep down, that he was simply trying to navigate between two worlds. But inside, I felt the sting of being slowly erased. The worst came the night Michael forgot my birthday. I sat in my little house, the kitchen table set for one, a small cake from the grocery store waiting in the fridge. He didn't call. He didn't text. At 9 o'clock, I gave up, cut a slice for myself, and whispered, "Happy birthday, old man." I laughed bitterly, but the tears came anyway. When I confronted him the next day, he apologized half-heartedly. "Things have been busy, Dad. You know how it is." But I saw the way Cassandra's hand tightened on his arm, her eyes warning him not to waste too much time on me. And then, last year, the first real crack appeared. Robert pulled me aside at a family dinner, his voice low. "Frank, you've worked hard your whole life, but maybe it's time to consider what happens after. You should think about your will. These things matter, especially with grandchildren in the picture." The implication was clear. My assets, meager as they were, would be more useful in their hands than in mine. I laughed it off, but the seed was planted, not in me, but in them. Over time, I began to notice Michael's visits home growing shorter, more transactional. He asked about my life insurance, about the deed to the house, about things no son should fixate on unless pushed by greed. His questions had the slick polish of Robert's influence, and yet I held on. Because a father always holds on, even when he knows the rope is fraying. The final humiliation before the wine came just a month ago. I was at a dinner party, surrounded by Robert's business associates. Someone asked Michael where his father was. He gestured toward me with a dismissive wave. "Oh, that's Frank. He's just retired. Just retired." As if the decades I spent breaking my body for him were a footnote. That night, I went home and sat in the dark. My house felt too quiet, too empty. I tried to remember the boy who once ran into my arms, who once promised to make me proud. I tried to believe he was still in there somewhere. But the truth was already forming like a shadow I couldn't ignore. And when Michael showed up on my doorstep weeks later, holding that expensive bottle of wine wrapped in silk, his smile too polished, his eyes too rehearsed, something in me hesitated. It wasn't just a gift. It was something else. I didn't know it then. But my hesitation may have saved my life. The day after Robert Carson was rushed to the hospital, my phone rang. It was Michael. His voice was low, urgent. "Dad, we need to talk. Tonight. At Robert's place." Something in his tone sent a chill down my spine, but I agreed. By the time I arrived at the Carson estate that evening, the air was thick with unease. Their sprawling home, with its towering columns and polished marble floors, always felt like a world I didn't belong in. That night, it felt like a courtroom. Michael greeted me stiffly at the door, avoiding my eyes. Cassandra stood behind him, her expression unreadable. Robert's wife sat near the fireplace, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief. And then Robert himself entered, pale but upright, leaning heavily on a cane. His skin was sallow, his voice gravelly, but his eyes carried the same sharp gleam. "Frank," he rasped, lowering himself into a chair, "we have a serious matter to discuss." I sat opposite them, the leather chair swallowing me whole. My son didn't sit beside me. He sat next to Robert. Robert gestured to the bottle of wine sitting on the coffee table between us. "That bottle you gave me, it nearly killed me." I felt my stomach twist. "Michael gave it to me. For my birthday." Robert's lips curled. "So you thought you'd pass it on? Very generous." His words dripped with venom. "But tell me, Frank, How does a bottle worth several $1,000s end up poisoned? That doesn't happen by chance. I don't know, I stammered. I don't drink anymore. You thought wrong, Robert snapped, slamming his cane against the floor. And now I'm left poisoned in a hospital bed while you sit here pretending to be innocent. I looked to Michael, desperate for him to speak, to defend me, to tell the truth. But he stared down at his folded hands, silent. Dad, he finally said, his voice quiet but firm. They think you did this, that you tried to hurt Robert. The room spun. What? Michael, you know me. You know I'd never… But Cassandra cut in sharply. The police are already involved. They're reviewing the bottle. And if they find any link to you, Frank, well, attempted murder carries a heavy sentence. The words hit me like stones. Attempted murder. My own son's in-laws were painting me as a criminal. And worse, Michael wasn't denying it. Robert leaned forward, his voice low, calculated. Now, we don't want to see you dragged through the mud, Frank. You're an old man. Prison wouldn't suit you, but we do need assurances that this kind of recklessness won't threaten our family again. Assurances? I whispered. Cassandra's lips curved into something between a smile and a sneer. Your house, your accounts? Sign them over into a trust, for Michael and me to manage. If you do that, we can make this whole thing disappear. No police, no trial, just family taking care of family. I felt my breath catch. My house, the small savings I had built over a lifetime, everything I had left to stand on. They weren't just accusing me, they were cornering me. This is insane, I said, my voice breaking. You think I'd poison anyone? You think I'd poison you, Robert? Robert's eyes burned into mine. The facts speak for themselves. Who else had the bottle? And there it was, the trap. My son had delivered the wine, but I had handed it to Robert. In their version of events, I was the only one with motive, the only one reckless enough, bitter enough to lash out. I turned to Michael again, praying he would stand up, that he would tell them the truth. His jaw tightened, but he didn't look at me. Dad, he murmured, maybe it's best if you just do what they're asking, for everyone's sake. That was the knife. Not Robert's words, not Cassandra's sneer, but my son, my only son, urging me to give up everything I had left. I thought of the nights I came home with oil under my fingernails, too tired to eat, but still waking up early to make him breakfast. I thought of the baseball games, the scraped knees, the graduation day when he'd promised to make me proud. And here he was, sitting beside the man who mocked me, asking me to surrender my dignity to cover for a crime he had set in motion. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Finally, Robert slid a folder across the table. Papers, contracts, places for my signature. This is mercy, Frank, he said softly. Sign and walk away, free. My hands trembled as I picked up the pen. The weight of humiliation pressed on my chest like a stone. They had already decided my fate, guilty in their eyes, stripped of my worth, erased from my own life. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, Cassandra's smug anticipation, Robert's calculated patience, Michael's tense, silent betrayal. My throat tightened as I lowered the pen to the paper, my signature, the last piece of myself. For a moment, I considered it, to sign, to avoid prison, to disappear quietly into the shadows. But then I stopped. I set the pen down slowly, deliberately, and pushed the folder back across the table. The room bristled with shock. I won't, I said softly. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. I won't sign away my life. Not like this. Robert's face darkened. Cassandra gasped, and Michael finally looked at me. Really looked at me, with eyes that held something between fear and fury. You're making a mistake, Dad, he said. I rose from the chair, my knees stiff but steady. No, Michael. I already made one. I raised you to think loyalty could be bought. I walked to the door as their voices rose behind me, threats and accusations swirling like a storm, but I didn't turn back. My chest burned, my throat ached, and my vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall in front of them. When I stepped out into the cool night air, the silence was deafening. My hands shook. My body felt heavy, but somewhere deep inside, something shifted. They thought they had broken me, that I would crawl away, defeated and humiliated, an old man stripped of everything. But they were wrong. I didn't need to say it. I didn't need to scream or threaten. The decision was already carved into me, silent and certain. I would not be erased. The night I walked out of the Carson estate, I thought I'd feel empty. And I did, for a while. The betrayal pressed on me like a weight, making each breath heavy. My son had sided with men who would gladly see me in prison. But beneath the ache, something else simmered. Not rage, not yet. Something colder, sharper. I began with silence. I didn't call Michael. I didn't return Cassandra's stiff texts. I let them believe I was retreating into shame. People like the Carsons thrived on intimidation. They mistook quiet for surrender. But while they laughed in their marble halls, I began to prepare. First, I went to the bank. Over the years, I had squirreled away more than they realized. Small investments, quiet savings, certificates of deposit. Nothing flashy, but steady. I had always told Michael about the modest account he knew, the one they had asked me to sign over. What he didn't know was that decades of overtime and a cautious old man's foresight had built a second nest egg, hidden, untouched, waiting. I moved funds, redirected payments, and froze every automatic transfer tied to my name. The Carsons might have thought they'd cornered me financially, but when Cassandra tried to use the paperwork Robert had pushed across the table, she discovered something different. The document I had slid back to them had been a decoy. I'd let Robert's lawyer draft it, and let them believe I'd left with guilt gnawing at me. What they hadn't realized was that, days earlier, I'd quietly consulted my own attorney, a man I trusted from my union days. He had advised me on exactly how to protect what little I had. And I'd listened. My assets were locked tight. I knew the moment they discovered it. Cassandra called me, her voice syrupy but strained. "Frank," she said, "we ran into a little hiccup with the transfer. Maybe you signed in the wrong place?" I let the silence drag. "Is that so?" "Yes," she replied too quickly. "It happens all the time. Why don't you stop by and we'll sort it out together?" I could almost see her pacing in their mansion, her nails clicking against the phone. "I'll think about it," I said simply, and hung up. That was the first seed, the first fracture in their confidence. The second came a week later, at Robert's company. I had worked in factories long enough to know how rumors spread. Fast, indiscriminate, unstoppable. All it took was one whisper, carefully placed, to unravel a man's pristine image. Through an old friend who still worked maintenance in one of Robert's developments, I dropped a suggestion that Robert's collapse hadn't been natural, that maybe, just maybe, the wine hadn't been what it seemed, that there were whispers of insurance fraud, of desperate measures to cover losses in his latest real estate project. I never accused. I never named myself. I just left the ember. And within days, I heard the fire crackling. Contractors grew cautious. A supplier delayed a shipment. An investor pulled out of a pending deal. Robert, proud and controlling, found himself cornered by shadows he couldn't control. I watched from the distance, quietly, as cracks spread through the foundation of his empire. Michael called me one evening, his voice tense. "Dad, what did you do?" "Do?" I repeated, my tone flat. There are rumors going around about Robert, about the poisoning. People are saying—" He stopped, his breath sharp in the receiver. "Did you start this?" I almost smiled. "Michael, if people are talking, maybe it's because they have something to talk about." He cursed under his breath. "You don't know what you're doing. You're making it worse." "For whom?" I asked softly, then hung up. That was the second win. Small, but satisfying. The third came more directly. I still had the receipt from the bottle Michael had given me. A strange detail, but I had kept it. Not from him, but from the specialty store downtown. The receipt showed not just the purchase, but the method of payment. A card tied to Michael's account. I slipped it into an envelope with no return address and mailed it to Robert's largest investor, along with a note. Ask yourself why a son would buy a poisoned bottle for his father. I imagined the look on Robert's face when that call came. The fury, the doubt, the sudden question of loyalty. Because greed is powerful, but paranoia is stronger. I knew I couldn't yet prove their intent in court. Not without exposing myself to the same fire, but I didn't need to. Not yet. All I needed was to unsettle them, to remind them I wasn't a pawn they could shove off the board, and it worked. The next time I saw Michael, at a forced family dinner Cassandra arranged to smooth things over, he looked thinner. His suit hung looser on his shoulders, his hair unkempt at the edges. He forced a smile, but his eyes flicked nervously every time Robert's name was mentioned. Robert himself was quieter, more watchful. Cassandra tried to keep the conversation cheerful, but her fingers drummed incessantly against her wine glass. I sat there, calm, composed, answering their shallow questions with steady patience. Each sip of water, each careful pause, was a victory, because they no longer looked at me as the relic at the edge of the table. They looked at me as a problem, a threat, and that was enough to shift the air. When I left that night, Michael followed me to the driveway. His voice cracked. "Dad, what's your endgame here?" I met his eyes, the same eyes that once looked up at me with trust and love, now clouded with fear. "You'll see," I said quietly, and for the first time since this all began, I saw it. The flicker of doubt. The realization that maybe, just maybe, his old man wasn't as weak or as disposable as he thought. The energy had shifted. The Carsons were not the kind to sit quietly while their empire cracked. When rumors spread and contracts slipped through their fingers, they struck back with the only weapon they trusted more than money: control. It started with a letter, thick paper, embossed seal, a summons to appear in civil court. They were suing me for defamation, claiming that I had spread malicious lies about Robert's business and caused measurable financial damage. The number attached to the lawsuit was laughable: $10 million. They might as well have claimed I owed them the moon. But the intent was clear: to bury me under fear, to drag my name through the courts until I couldn't breathe. Michael called me that night. His voice was cold, almost rehearsed. "You brought this on yourself, Dad. You kept pushing. Now it's out of my hands." "Out of your hands," I said quietly. "Or exactly where you wanted them to be." He didn't answer, just exhaled sharply and hung up. For a day, I let myself feel the weight. The walls of my modest home seemed to close in, the silence pressing like a judge's gavel. The thought of court, of standing accused while Robert's lawyers painted me as a bitter old man seeking revenge, made my stomach knot. But fear has a way of sharpening memory, and in that silence, I remembered something. It was 2 years earlier, long before Cassandra and her family fully pulled Michael into their world. We had sat in my backyard one summer evening, beers in hand, fireflies sparking in the twilight. Michael had been nervous, distracted. I pressed him until he confessed that Robert was helping him invest, quietly, in a Carson property deal. He wasn't supposed to tell me. "I just wanted your advice, Dad," he'd said, leaning forward. "You've always been careful with money. Do you think it's smart?" I had warned him to keep record. Any time you give someone money, especially family, you write it down. You keep proof. Don't trust anyone's memory when money's involved. He had nodded, and I thought the advice had gone in one ear and out the other. But later that night, he had sent me a copy of the draft agreement Robert gave him, a shaky document, half legal jargon, half handshakes and promises. I had filed it away, half forgotten, until now. I dug through my old boxes, dusty folders, and found it. Michael's name, his signature, tied directly to Robert's questionable dealings, the same dealings that were now collapsing under scrutiny. That was my card. The next hearing, I didn't walk in with fear. I walked in with a quiet calm that unsettled even me. Robert's lawyers tried to paint me as a spiteful retiree, bitter over his son's success, spreading poison with my words. They spoke of honor, reputation, family legacy. When they finished, my lawyer, the same union man who had guided me before, stood and held up the document. Your Honor, this is a property investment agreement, signed by the plaintiff's son-in-law, Michael Hillmount. It directly connects the Carsons to misrepresentation and potential fraud in a deal currently under review. If my client was maliciously spreading lies, how is it that we have written proof the Carsons themselves engaged in questionable, possibly criminal behavior? The courtroom shifted. Murmurs rippled through the benches. Robert's face turned ashen. Cassandra stiffened. Michael sat frozen, his eyes darting toward me, then to Robert, as though caught between two firing squads. The case was adjourned for review. Not dismissed, but suddenly far less certain. That night, Michael showed up at my doorstep. His knock was heavy, his face pale under the porch light. "Where did you get that?" he demanded, his voice low and urgent. I looked him in the eye. "You gave it to me. 2 years ago. You asked for my advice." His jaw tightened, shame flickering across his features. "You're going to ruin me." "No, Michael," I said softly. "You ruined yourself the moment you let them turn you against me." For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, buried under layers of arrogance and fear, but it passed quickly. He clenched his fists, his voice rising. "You think this changes anything? Robert has power. Cassandra has connections. You can't fight us. You're alone." "Alone?" I stepped forward, my voice steady. "Do you think I spent 67 years on this earth without making friends of my own? Men who stood beside me on picket lines? Men who know what loyalty means? You're not the only one with people watching your back." It was true. Over the past weeks, I had quietly reconnected with old friends, former co-workers, men who remembered me as the one who never bowed to management. They had whispered, spread doubts, fanned the flames I'd lit. I wasn't alone. Michael faltered, his shoulders slumping just slightly. But then he straightened, forcing a smirk. "You won't win, Dad. You'll just drag us all down with you. Then down you go," I replied. We stood there, the porch light casting sharp shadows between us, father and son locked in silence. It wasn't yelling. It wasn't fists. It was something heavier, a standoff of bloodlines, of betrayal, of two men who shared the same eyes, but stood on opposite sides of truth. And in that silence, I knew this was no longer just about survival. It was about judgment. The day of the hearing felt like walking into the lion's den. The Carsons had pulled every string they had. Reporters lined the steps of the courthouse, cameras flashing, pens scratching in notepads. Michael and Cassandra arrived arm in arm, their faces set in masks of composure. Robert followed behind, leaning on his cane, every inch the wronged patriarch. And then there was me, walking alone, dressed in the same navy suit I'd worn to Michael's graduation decades earlier. My suit wasn't polished, but it was clean, and I wore it with quiet pride. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. The Carsons' lawyers came armed with thick binders and sharpened words. Their strategy was simple: destroy me publicly. They painted me as bitter, senile, a jealous father incapable of accepting his son's success. They claimed the rumors of Robert's corruption came from me alone, a desperate old man seeking relevance. At one point, Robert himself stood, his voice booming across the courtroom. "This man," he declared, pointing at me, "nearly killed me with poisoned wine. And now he seeks to kill my reputation. How much longer must my family endure his madness?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Michael sat stiff beside him, his lips pressed in a thin line. but I saw the gleam in Cassandra's eyes. She thought this was the end. And then the judge turned to my attorney. "Defense?" My lawyer nodded, and I rose slowly to my feet. My knees ached, but my voice was steady. "Your Honor, if I may, I'd like to present evidence not only of my innocence, but of the Carsons' deceit." I reached into the folder I carried and pulled out a USB drive. My lawyer inserted it into the court's projector. The screen flickered to life. "Exhibit A," my lawyer said. "A recorded phone call dated 3 weeks ago." The courtroom filled with static. Then Michael's voice. Clear, distinct. "Dad doesn't even know what's coming. Robert says once the will is adjusted, it's all ours. One little bottle, and this whole thing will be over." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, murmurs. The judge banged his gavel for order. My son's voice echoed again. "Trust me, no one will suspect. Who would believe an old man over Robert Carson?" Michael's face went white. Cassandra's nails dug into his arm. Robert's jaw slackened, his hand gripping his cane like a weapon. But I wasn't done. "Exhibit B," my lawyer continued, lifting the document I had unearthed from my files. "An investment agreement signed by Michael Hillmount, proving his direct involvement in fraudulent property deals arranged by Robert Carson. Deals currently under federal review." The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. The judge leaned forward, scanning the papers. And then I stood, not with anger, not with raised voice, but with the calmness of a man who had carried humiliation long enough. "I am a father," I said, turning slowly to face the room, my words carrying through the air like iron. "I gave my son everything I had. My time, my work, my love. And what did I receive? A bottle of poison and a demand to sign away my life." The audience stirred, shifting in their seats. Reporters scribbled furiously. Robert Carson tried to erase me. Cassandra mocked me. And Michael? My voice caught, just for a moment. My own blood, my boy, thought I was disposable. But today, the truth speaks louder than money. The judge looked toward Robert. "Mr. Carson, do you deny these recordings and documents?" Robert opened his mouth, but no words came. The mighty man who once sneered at my modest whiskey gift now stood trembling, his empire crumbling in front of witnesses. Michael rose suddenly, desperation breaking through his mask. "It's not true. My father, he's twisting everything. I turned to him, calm, steady. "Michael," I said softly, so the whole courtroom hushed to hear, "you once promised to make me proud. Today, you've only proven that blood alone doesn't make a son." The words hit like a hammer. Michael froze, his face twisted with something between rage and shame. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. For the first time, he was truly silent. The judge called for order, declaring the evidence required a deeper criminal investigation. The Carsons' lawsuit was dismissed on the spot. Reporters swarmed as the gavel struck, their cameras flashing on Robert's ashen face, on Cassandra, clutching Michael's arm, on the dynasty collapsing in real time. But I didn't stay for the chaos. I gathered my folder, straightened my old suit, and walked out into the sunlight. Each step felt lighter, the weight lifting from my chest. Behind me, I could still hear the cacophony, their empire unraveling thread by thread. As I reached the courthouse steps, a reporter rushed toward me. "Mr. Hillmount, what do you have to say about your victory today?" I paused, turned toward the crowd of flashing cameras, and spoke the only line that mattered. "Family built on greed will always collapse under its own weight." The crowd erupted, microphones shoved toward me, pens scratching to catch every word. But I didn't linger. I turned, walked down the steps, and disappeared into the city. For the first time in years, I felt free. In the weeks that followed, the world around the Carsons shifted like sand beneath their feet. Robert's company, once untouchable, staggered under the weight of investigation. Investors fled, contractors demanded audits, and the whispers I had helped spread became headlines. He resigned from several boards under pressure, retreating into his estate, his empire reduced to a shell. Cassandra's smile, so polished and sharp, faded under the scrutiny. The social circles that once adored her kept their distance, wary of scandal. Invitations dried up, and her carefully curated life of luxury began to crack. And Michael, my son, he faced questions from investigators, his voice trembling in interviews, his name no longer tied to success, but to betrayal. His career at the firm collapsed, colleagues turning cold, clients withdrawing trust. He tried reaching out once, a voicemail left in the dead of night. His voice broke halfway through, a mixture of anger and regret. But I didn't return the call. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Some silences are earned. I didn't rejoice in their ruin. I didn't dance on the ashes. Revenge had never been about destruction. It had been about truth, about showing the world, and Michael, that I wasn't the weak old man they thought could be erased with a poisoned gift and a forged signature. I found peace in quieter places. My mornings returned to routine. Black coffee on the porch, the sunrise stretching gold over Indianapolis. I fixed the squeaky gate in the yard, the same one Michael used to swing on as a boy. I dusted off old fishing rods, spent afternoons by Eagle Creek, the water calm, the silence broken only by birdsong. I even reconnected with neighbors I had neglected, men and women who reminded me that community, not wealth, was the truest form of security. Sometimes, at night, I would pull out the old photo of Michael as a boy, gap-toothed, holding the fish we caught together, his smile wide and real. I would trace the edge of the frame, wondering where that boy had gone, wondering if he could ever come back. But I never let the sadness consume me, because grief, like anger, has its place. But dignity must remain. One afternoon, weeks after the trial, I ran into Robert's wife at the grocery store. She looked smaller, tired, her eyes red. She glanced at me, shame in her expression. For a moment, I thought she might spit venom like she once had. Instead, she whispered, "I'm sorry for what they did to you." I nodded. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just acknowledgement. And that was enough. Life moved on. And so did I. Looking back, the wine bottle was never just a bottle. It was a symbol of how far my own son had drifted, of how greed can corrode love, of how respect can vanish when pride takes its place. They thought I was finished, but what they forgot was that age doesn't weaken a man who still carries truth in his bones. I was humiliated once, mocked at my own table, treated as disposable, but in the end, it wasn't me who was erased. It was them. Their own lies consumed them. Their greed devoured them. And I am still here. The house is quiet, yes, lonelier than I once hoped, but peaceful, honest, free of poison, free of manipulation. And when I sit on my porch and watch the world go by, I don't feel defeated anymore. I feel steady. People think revenge is about striking back, about fire and fury. But I've learned something else. Real revenge is letting the truth breathe and watching karma do the rest. So if there's one lesson in all this, it's simple. Respect cannot be bought. Loyalty cannot be forced. And a man's worth doesn't vanish with age. Because sooner or later, those who treat love as weakness learn the hardest truth of all, that greed may build a house, but respect is what makes it a home. And without it, everything collapses. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it touched something in your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts, or even your own experiences, down in the comments. Every story carries its own truth, and sometimes sharing it helps us heal. If you found value in this tale, don't forget to hit that like button and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Your support means more than you know. Until then, take care of yourselves, and remember, respect and love are the true legacies we leave behind.